Okay, I think we can begin. So welcome everyone to our Futures webinar today on regenerative agriculture. Can we enrich ecosystems as we farm? My name's Anna Simpson. I'm the curator of the Future Centre at Forum for the Future, and I have a great pleasure to be hosting the conversation today. This webinar is brought to you by Forum for the Future. Many of you know us already, and we're an international independent non-profit with a 20-year track record in driving sustainable development. Our purpose is to accelerate the big shift to a sustainable future by transforming whole systems. As part of our work, we look at what's changing around us, and we like to delve into discussions around this change as it emerges and its implications for a sustainable future. And so these Futures webinars are part of a series where we bring our network, you, into conversation with us to explore these possibilities. And over the last year, we've looked at a variety of topics, from the microbiome to blockchain to the circular economy to citizen innovation. Our spanning takes place on the Future Centre, as well as in conversation and through our events and through our project work. And we'd really welcome you to join us there if you haven't already, where you can share signals of change and explore their potential for sustainable development and some of the implications for our projects and for your own work. There recently we've been sharing around the news from the FAO that farmland is actually shrinking for the first time in history since agriculture began. So this is a very interesting development and backdrop for today's discussion. So with us today in the room we have Mark Driscoll. Mark is Associate Director of Sustainable Nutrition at Forum for the Future. He's leading our work on sustainable food systems. He has a background in agriculture and has worked with various organisations over the last 20 years. He leads a number of collaborative projects at Forum, including the Protein Challenge and latterly our work on regenerative agriculture. I'm going to start by talking about what regenerative agriculture is and why it's particularly important now, drawing on some of the emerging trends that we've been seeing at Forum. We also have two guests who I'm very pleased to introduce. Sarah Gleeson from the Savory Institute. Sarah is the Director of Marketing and Communications, and the Savory Institute is a global network to promote and facilitate large-scale restoration of the world's grasslands. She's also a bison producer whose herd resides and is holistically managed outside of Rapid City in Dakota. Sarah grew up in the mountains of Colorado, began her career in Washington, D.C., working with environmental organizations and for Congress. As Director of Marketing for Whole Foods Markets in Denver, she delved into the stories of local ranchers and farmers and producers in the Rocky Mountains. Now at the Savory Institute, she continues her passion for telling stories about agriculture, land management, socioeconomic concerns and environmental issues. I'm also very happy to welcome Judith. So Judith B Schwartz is a widely published journalist whose current work focuses on regenerative agriculture to address many of our overlapping global challenges. Judith is author of Cows Save the Planet and Other Improbable Ways of Restoring Soil to His Earth, and also Water in Plain Sight for a Thirsty World. She speaks nationally and internationally about regenerative agriculture and soil, water, climate connections and solutions, most recently in Mexico, France, Norway and Switzerland. She's based in the US, in southern Vermont, and she's joining us now on a farm after 5 days with Regeneration International in Mexico. So very pleased to have you, Judith, too. So now I'm going to introduce Mark to kick us off. And after our discussion, we'll hear from Mark, then we'll hear from Sarah, and we'll hear from Judith. And then we'll have a Q&A. So you're very welcome to share your thoughts and your questions in the chat panel as shown. You should see this bar along your screen, either at the top or the bottom, and a chat box there. So please type them in as we go, feel free. And at the end, we'll look forward to opening those up and exploring those with our panelists. And if you do have any problems along the way, just get in touch with Mel Trievner. So her email is on the screen now, m.trievner@Forum for the Future. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to hearing from our speakers. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're in the US. I know we're spanning several time zones with this webinar. So Anna has already said what I'm going to focus on is why a regenerative agricultural approach is important. I will share some of my insights in terms of what it is, because I think there are different cultural and geographical interpretations of what regenerative agriculture and regenerative agricultural practice really means, and then touch on a few thoughts in terms of how we could potentially take this agenda forward, collaborate around this agenda, and how Forum is working on this agenda. I suppose my approach is I believe there's actually a real need for a fundamental shift in the way we approach sustainability in agriculture, really to meet some of the fundamental challenges of the 21st century, particularly I think in the context of global climatic change. Obviously, the need in that context to limit emissions certainly below 1.5 degrees, the context of resource scarcity, and the context of a growing global population, a growing middle class with changing diets, all putting pressure on the planet's limited resources. And my approach here, certainly a lot of our work at Forum for the Future is based on sustainable nutrition. So the need to move from an agriculture and food system, which is really, I think, currently predicated on producing more food with less impact, really to one that's based on producing more healthy and nutritious foods, whilst actually restoring and regenerating the ecosystems and our societies on which our very food system depends. So there's some real challenges that our agricultural and food system confront. And for many of us working in this space, it served us well since the Second World War, but it has generated enormous pressures on societies and the environment. 795 million people still suffering from hunger, a fair billion people still suffering from malnutrition. I actually think a regenerative agricultural approach is key here, one in which systems of food production actually put more back into the environment and society than they actually take out. I have, I suppose, witnessed in conversations and through conferences and workshops quite a fundamental shift in the way people talk about the role agriculture plays in addressing some of these challenges over the last 18 months. And I think there's increasing recognition on the need to address agriculture's impact on climate change, for example. And just in May, some of you may have noticed that former President Barack Obama gave a really interesting keynote speech exhorting climate change campaigners, investors, and businesses to focus as much on agricultural and land use challenges as perhaps some of the traditional challenges around energy, transport, manufacturing. And of course, you know, we live in a world where many of the global nations have signed up to commitments under the Sustainable Development Goals, Paris climate change agreements example. So, you know, there's a real kind of context here and a real urgency and a real opportunity for regenerative agriculture. And I think within businesses themselves, a number of organizations have, I think, quite rightly invested quite heavily in certification as a key mechanism on which to pursue sustainable agricultural practice. But at the same time, I think organisations are recognising that certification is just one tool in that toolbox. And whilst there has been many benefits of that approach, there are also limitations to certification. And I think this is where there's real opportunity and where regenerative agricultural approach could offer a solution. I think based on our research, and we're at Forum are doing some scoping work around regenerative agriculture, there are actually many definitions of regenerative agriculture, and actually these do vary quite significantly according to culture or geography. And I think for many stakeholders, and I think this particularly rings true for stakeholders in the US and Europe, there's a strong, and rightly so, focus on carbon. And in contrast to much resource-intensive agricultural practice throughout the food system today, regenerative agriculture is a real solution to carbon, returning carbon to the planet's soils through techniques such as cover cropping, residue mulching, composting, crop rotation, conservation, tillage, and a real opportunity to address the impacts of climate change. Many scientists suggest, whether this is true or not, I don't know, but the opportunity of storing 3 billion tonnes of carbon annually, whilst obviously building resilience of our food system to the worsening impacts of climate change. For many cultures in other parts of the world, regenerative agricultural practice refers to restoring biodiversity, restoring, regenerating forests, grasslands, wetlands. And of course, ultimately, a regenerative approach in all its forms is about ultimately improving livelihoods of farmers. So that's just a little bit of context. I suppose at Forum, we do believe there's a real opportunity to mobilise farmers, civil societies, food and agricultural businesses to really scale up and accelerate regenerative agricultural practice that benefits both livelihoods and the planet. And at the moment, we are undertaking an initial piece of scoping work. I think we've interviewed actually some of the participants in this webinar to really pull together some case studies of great agricultural practice, really to identify those barriers to scale and impact, and potentially to look at the opportunities for collaboration to address those barriers while scaling up the kind of best practice and innovation already happening in the field. And certainly over the research that we and my colleagues have undertaken the last few months, there is a lot of innovation happening in the field. And I think others are going to talk to that today.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that overview. So we have before us this real opportunity to address climate challenges, nutritional challenges, and make ourselves more resilient as societies, restore our biodiversity, improve livelihoods, and there is innovation happening. And so now we're going to hear from Sarah at the Savory Institute, and Sarah's going to talk about what some of this means in practice and the challenges and opportunities that the Savory Institute is seeing for its vast global network. So welcome, Sarah, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning. Thank you, Anna. And Anna, I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. I'm getting a notice that I can't share my screen while you're sharing your screen. So I was wondering if I could take over. So let's back up really quickly. Let's see if I can. There we go. So thank you so much. I'm glad to be participating. Let me just get this going again. As Anna said, I am with the Savory Institute. And the work that we do, you can see now that, does that work, Anna? Does that look good for you? Great. So the work that we do really is in how do we do this? How do we do this scale up? How do we put this in practice? Mark said some really great things this morning about this need to scale up regenerative agriculture, about this idea of agriculture putting more back into environment than it is taking. And so at the Savory Institute, what we do, we acknowledge that, you know, a third of the Earth's land surface is grasslands, and 70% of those grasslands have been degraded. And so what does that mean, this huge loss of grasslands? That means climate change and the release of this carbon that should be stored in the roots of healthy grasslands is being released into atmospheric carbon. It means food insecurity. It means floods, droughts, a lot of the major global issues that we are seeing. And so we believe that it is vital that we restore and restore the soils and restore the grasslands, because there is such a huge opportunity for climatic improvement if we can sequester carbon back into those soils. And the way that we believe that that is best done is by managing livestock holistically. Holistic management is a decision-making framework that takes into the context into account, to multiple factors into account, and offers a set of planning processes from holistic planned grazing, financial planning, that actually gives true triple bottom results. So social, financial, and environmental results. So this is actually just a slide of our website, savory.global. But this is a quote from our founder, Alan Savory. A number of you might be familiar with him. Alan says, ultimately, the only wealth that can sustain any community, economy, or nation is derived from the photosynthetic process, green plants growing on regenerating soil. And we really believe that. We really believe any community, even an urban community, anywhere in the world, any civilization really has to be supported by healthy soils producing plants, so that animals can eat, we can eat, and the world can survive. So we really believe that, and the way we focus on this is by using holistic management, which essentially is mimicking nature with properly managed livestock to restore grasslands, and looking at the actual biological processes of birth, growth, death, and decay that happens, and how do we improve that and mimic nature. And so what we have seen is that in a lot of areas that we were trying, we being the human race, we're trying to protect or help recover from misuse, we decided to take grazing animals and ruminants off of that land. We thought that there was overgrazing or too many animals on that land. And what we saw when we removed them is that we were breaking an ecosystem process that was happening with the dung and the urine and the trampling of the litter that was on the ground that allowed those nutrients to go back into the soil and create healthy ecosystem processes. When we removed those animals, those grasslands actually became worse and turned to desert. So at Savory, we have a hub network, a global hub network throughout the world of local contextual practitioners, hubs we call them, that are the implementation support, education support, collaborative support with their own demonstration sites around the world, that are managing livestock holistically and are the resource for the producers, the farmers, the ranchers in their part of the world. And we now have 30 hubs around the world. Our goal is to have 100 hubs around the world and to be affecting 1 billion hectares of land by 2025. And that is essentially our scale-up model, because we believe that we need these hubs to accelerate this process to actually have large-scale effect on land. So essentially that is the work that we do and the core of the work of the Savory Institute. And is there anything that you would like me to expand on further, or? I think Anna is still on mute.
Sorry, I'm still in mute and I was struggling to get out of it. Thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing that. And we'll love to come back to you to hear more about some of the examples of your work and delve into some of those best practice case studies in a little bit. Now, I'm just going to share my screen again and introduce Judith. So Judith, are you there? Wonderful. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. We know you're just back from Mexico, and so we'd love to hear about the insights you've been uncovering at this Regeneration International Conference there.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. I'm still in Mexico right now. I'm at a hotel and it has a bit of an unstable connection, so I'll do my best. And we might in fact start hearing some kitchen noises as people are preparing breakfast. I really appreciated Anna's remarks and Mark's and Sarah's, and I will say a couple of things as to transition, that I have been to several of the Savory hubs, and I have seen land that has been restored to an extraordinary degree. And so I'm also very excited about their work. And a few of Sarah's colleagues have been here in Mexico at this meeting. So this was the second General Assembly of Regeneration International, which is a global network of activists, scientists, farmers, ranchers, consumer advocates, communicators, and people of that ilk, horticulturalists, etc. And so we've had a really dynamic meeting in which we've been grappling with the fact that we basically have a coalition of 3 billion consumers and 3 billion producers, and how can we meet together so that what the consumers are consuming and the producers are producing is regenerative. So we come to understand climate change as manifestations of distorted carbon, water, and energy cycles. And once we open that up, we realize that there are many opportunities that we can intervene to restore those cycles. And one thing that we haven't talked about much is the role of the water cycle, because our climate is largely regulated by water-based processes. But the beauty of this is that soil and carbon and water are so deeply interconnected. Just as an example is that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, that represents an additional 20,000 gallons per acre that can be held in the landscape. That means resilience to drought. That means one needs to irrigate less. It means that you can absorb more water. As a colleague of mine says, it's that much harder to make a flood. So one thing that we have been talking about at this meeting is that there already exists a global agreement about regenerative agriculture, about returning carbon to the soil. And not many people have heard of it. As one of the speakers here said, this is the most important climate agreement that you've never heard of. And this was brought forward at COP21 by the French government and French Agricultural Ministry. And it is the 4 per 1,000 initiative. And that basically says that for every 0.04 increase, might be 0.004, anyway, 4 per 1,000 increase in soil carbon annually, if our agricultural lands could make that increase, which is very doable, and as I'm going to tell you right now, we can do 600 times that, that will bring us to net. That can make up the gap between emissions reductions and where we need to be. And the beauty of it is that it's restoring ecosystem function at the same time. So everything is connected. the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the potential for enhanced biodiversity, the reversal of desertification, and of course the revival of communities, including rural communities, which are suffering throughout the world. So I might have teased you a little bit that we can do 600 times that, because we are learning so much about practices and processes that really bolster the the accumulation of carbon in the soil. And one that's just particularly exciting that we've been getting an education about is a particular compost system called the Johnson-Su method. And they have been finding they've been getting extraordinary results. It's a simple method that can be done anywhere. The processes are all open source, so anyone can do it. And essentially by bolstering, okay, here's one way to articulate it, is that we know that forests are very, very dynamic and productive ecosystems. One aspect of forests is that it has a greater fungal component in its microbiology compared to the bacterial. So what this system does is it creates a greater fungal bacterial balance. Okay, that might be a little technical, but I have to say that we were all very excited about it. And we also were getting a sense of the many, many businesses that are aligned with ecological processes. And one area that is very exciting, and I know that the Savory Institute is involved in this, is clothing. So clothing is has the third greatest environmental impact of our industries behind food and transportation. But we often don't really think about it. And we're understanding that by growing fiber, whether it's animal fiber or plant-based fiber, regeneratively, using plant-based dyes, and using other methods that fashion can be regenerative. And very soon there are going to be some really so this works on the large scale. I know that major fashion brands are working on this, but it also works small scale. And the photo that we have on the screen here is a little snippet of an organization called Fibershed, which seeks to relocalize fashion. And so all across the world, I think there are 51 fiber sheds official fiber sheds around the world, where people are producing the fiber, they are processing the fiber, they are creating the clothing, and it's all sustainable and aesthetic, and it supports the local economies. So just as an example, this is in California. In California, already today, there is enough wool being produced to provide either a garment or an item of bedding to every citizen of the state. It is just that we are not making use of this resource. So I will stop now and open it up.
Thank you so much, Judith, and thanks to all our panelists. And it's great to hear the encouragement that you say it's very doable, and to hear that there are so many initiatives out there, the fibre sheds, the regenerative fashion, the means to rebalance the bacteria in the soils, the opportunities for communities. And I do want to come back to Sarah's beautiful concept of reconceptualization, really, of wealth as that which is underwritten, really, by green plants on our healthy soil. So keeping those two things in mind, I'd love to begin our discussion with the opportunities for businesses to support acceleration in this space. Would any of our panelists like to start on with in response to that? How can businesses support and get involved?
Hi, Anna. I will jump back in. I can actually see the chat questions also, so that's very helpful. So I will respond, it looks like Ian, to some great questions over in the chat. So I want to address first, there's a question of, does approach work best in certain, does certain approaches work best in certain ecosystems and farming types? Are there opportunities everywhere? And there are, and different, I would say the same approach, different decisions made. So for us, holistic management is really a decision-making framework. So by using that framework, it helps you to make decisions, whether that is where you're moving your animals, what animals to use, how you're doing land planning and laying out the planning of your land and how you're using it, the timing of your grazing, all of that, those decisions are made based upon your context and your ecosystem. So we say brittle or non-brittle. The brittleness scale varies obviously throughout the world. So yes, there will be different decisions made depending on the environment that you are working within. Definitely. And so holistic management allows for the freedom for people to make decisions and choices that give them the outcomes that they desire based upon their context. I hope that helps begin answer that question. And as far as big brands and corporate brands getting involved, there's a lot of different ways that can happen. I know that a lot of people on this call probably very much support collaboration and sharing of ideas and ways that we can work together. There are a number of ways that corporate brands and big businesses can be helpful, whether that's through donating, whether that's through partnerships and programs being started in different places in the world to bring education and resources to different communities. But most recently, the Savory Institute is actually beginning what we are calling a land to market program. And it will be the first time that we look at the end users, so beyond producers and land managers, we're actually looking at brands and companies in the fashion, wool, and food spaces, and brands that actually want to source products regeneratively. And when I say that, they want to be able to see data-backed outcomes showing that there is improvement upon the land. And so really, so far, we have not seen a standard, you would say, or a certification or a verification that is outcome-based, right? We have a lot of practice-based seals or certifications, but we don't have data-backed outcome-based ones. And so Savory has a very well-proven methodology of measuring outcomes on the land that show regeneration. And we are using that methodology to collect data through our hubs and regions around the world, and then share those producers and that information with brands who are wanting to source regeneratively for their products, if that makes sense. So we are beginning the prototyping of this program this fall, and it will be launched in its entirety at the beginning of 2018.
Thanks, Sarah. So you're saying that brands will be able to share about the background of their products, and actually to say with that, this product has contributed to this extent of regeneration. Absolutely, because there are a large population of people that do not manage land or livestock, but they want to vote with their dollar. They want to support products that are, again, supporting this idea of a regenerative supply chain rather than an extractive supply chain. One that is just taking from the land and taking from our natural resources to produce things that we are then consuming. How do we support a regenerative supply system by the products that we choose to purchase and consume? Great. We've got some more questions coming up, so I'm going to move on to these. From the Crown Estate, I assume we're only talking about unimproved grassland rather than intensive temperate pasture. Sarah, do you have an answer to that? And Judith, did you want to also respond?
I can respond. Yeah, Judith, you can jump in if you would like.
No, thank you. I think this is your question, Sarah.
Okay, great. And I'm so glad to have Judith with us. She has been a huge supporter and friend of the Savory Institute for many years. So it says, unimproved grasslands rather than intensive temperate pasture, both is the answer to that question. Really what we are looking at is plants. How do we make plants and soils healthy? And that can be done from a backyard farmer all the way to a rangeland manager on very huge grasslands around the world. So really it's more about the concept of how do we keep soils healthy and grass growing on them and water cycles healthy and working effectively. And so we believe that without ruminant animals, let me back up really quickly. Depending on your environment, we get a lot of comments on that holistic management is best only in dry, arid, brittle climates. And we do see that in the non-brittle, the very humid climates, that there is able to be some recovery of grasslands, or I should say of plants, without ruminant animals. But we also see that that land will return to jungle. So a lot of practices are done in non-brittle environments around the world that actually hurt the soils and hurt the community dynamics of the microbes that live there in order to control that overtaking jungle that is trying to invade pastures and invade grazing lands. And so we still use the same principles of managing holistically, even in the non-brittle, very humid climates, so that we can have healthy ecosystem processes and healthy lands and soils. And then in the most of the world, the large grasslands are, and lots of the ranchers and producers are in this arid, brittle climate. And so then it is crucial that we get that moisture and the microbes from the rumen of the animal into the soil to complete that ecosystem process. Does that make sense? I don't want to get too into the biological processes of systems and go down that train too far, but does that answer the question?
I think so, and I think if for anyone in the audience they have further inquiries, then please do keep posting your questions. But thank you very much, Sarah, for that answer. And I'm going to move us on to Harriet Bell's question that is a very interesting one, I think, for making this link between rural communities and urban ones. So we did touch a little in your presentations on the benefits to rural communities. And Harriet's asking, are there good case studies which demonstrate the potential relationship between regenerative agricultural land use and environmental services to urban areas or developed rural areas? And she's specifically mentioning surface water management, for example. So I guess we're talking about flooding. Any responses to that? Any you know of?
Well, okay, I'm here in Mexico, so I'm thinking, this is Judith, I'm thinking about Mexico. And I wanted to share a particular project that I had the opportunity to observe several months ago. And it's not specifically about water, but water always fits in when we are regenerating our ecosystems. So there's an organization called the Grupo Ecológico Sierra Gorda, which is up in the mountains in the state of Querétaro. It's very far to get to, so the people who have lived there for a long time have been fairly isolated. And what happened is that this population was growing and the lands were degrading. And so in order for these people to continue to engage in the overall national economy, they were basically destroying their natural assets, their forests. They were bringing cattle in to very fragile ecosystems, cloud forests, and the grazing practices were not holistic, and just things were really, really deteriorating. So this group, what they did was they created opportunities for the local people to engage in regenerative agriculture. So they do have a grazing component, but that's down in grassland areas that are not fragile forests, or they are grassland areas. They also have a flavor trail, a group of about 50 casual eateries. Okay, so this is a beautiful area. They do get visitors. Casual eateries that use local ingredients, regeneratively produced. And the other benefit, in addition to economical, is that this helps the local people preserve their traditions. And they have a unique cuisine, which was really interesting. That, I just was really, enchanted that, we might have fritters for a meal where the main ingredient is flower petals picked outside the restaurant. So, and then they also have an ecotourism component. But this is an example, and then they have products that they are bringing to market. They have a tradition of embroidery, very fine work, and so they sell those both on site for visitors, and then in the cities, in the city of Querétaro in particular, they have artisan outlets where these products, these soaps, and the embroidery pillows and cloths are sold as well.
And can I come in there on that question, response to the answer around case studies in an urban setting, Anna? So really just to add to that, particularly in the UK, I think organisations like the Water Utilities, the Environment Agency, I think are increasingly looking at regenerative approaches in the urban setting. So the kind of examples that come to my mind are things like what they call sustainable urban drainage systems, SUDS, where there is quite a demonstrable impact in terms of integrating permeable systems. So within an urban setting through car parking, many urban gardens have been paved over that have created water flooding issues downstream that have a huge economic cost. So there are a few examples where you could argue a regenerative approach in urban settings is starting to take place. Very small, very pilot and demonstration practice, but the potential to scale up that practice through better urban planning, for example, is one of those examples that is happening in the UK.
I've also myself seen an example just today of China, a city in China that's aiming to be really sort of more green than not, and making me think of the pollution issues and also the urban heat issues. So I'm sure there is more potential for regenerative agriculture to be providing ecosystem services in urban areas. I'd be interested for us to keep sharing examples of that on the Future Centre.
And we're particularly interested in any great examples here at Forum as part of a kind of ongoing work. So if any participants do have those great examples, both globally but also in a rural and urban setting, we would love to hear from those too.
Fantastic. I'll move on to Laura's question. So is there an issue with monocultures? Is it possible to regenerate the soil with one main crop? Need to move towards an ecosystem approach with a more diverse crop set?
Shall I jump in here?
Please.
Okay. Yeah, monocultures are a problem, and we can do better than that. So in regenerative agriculture is largely based on insights that are learned from nature. It's the notion of working with nature as opposed to trying to fight it. And nature does not, you look at any natural system and it's full of diversity. and every animal, insect, plant, microbe is serving a function. And what happens is that when we have monocultures, we are, by definition, introducing fragility into the system. And one has to really work to maintain the monoculture. And in that work, whether it's aggressively removing everything that isn't the desired plant, or using chemical means, that is undermining the resilience of that system. I don't know if Sarah, if you want to add anything to that.
I think that's great, Judith. I think also the idea of you can't regenerate something if you are only extracting from it, right? So if you're creating a monoculture where you are just monocropping and then taking that crop, planting again, taking that crop, planting again, that's not a cycle. That is an extractive method and model. And so lots of times we see in monocultures, the way that is kept up are the inputs that are put back in there are pesticides, herbicides, whatever sort of chemical, or maybe trying to bring in, whatever sort of fertilizers would be needed to continue to be able to use that land in that way. And can be very damaging to that soil in that attempt to synthetically create regeneration. But I think that thought of this cycle, the biological cycles and processes that need to happen to create regeneration just aren't consistent with monocultures.
Thank you both. I think you've both put that very eloquently, the emphasis on both the diversity and the give and take in a healthy ecosystem. This is an interesting nuance, coming back to the earlier point that you made, Sarah, I think, about I'm sorry, it might have been Judith, sorry, I'm confused, but about the benefits of the cows trampling the land and the dung, that cycle. There's a conflict there between the methane emissions from the ruminants and the benefits to soil fertility. That was you, Sarah.
Yes, I can start this, but then I would like Judith to jump in on her thoughts as well. So at the very basic level of understanding of methane and livestock, I have to start with, we all understand that there were very large, great herds of ruminants that lived on this planet, right? Regardless of where you are, whether it was bison in the United States, huge herds of all different species of ruminants. In Africa, there were very large herds that would migrate and graze throughout our worlds, and we did not have an issue with methane. And so when we think about this, I like us to remember what the environment and what nature was before we were the ones messing with it, and that there was not a methane issue before. Now, is there a methane issue with conventional livestock management, with manure lagoons and the water usage related and transportation costs related to the conventional livestock system? Yes. So I would say the issue is not in the livestock, it is in the management of the livestock. Judith, would you like to jump in and talk about, this is really great wheelhouse for you of methane troughs and things like that, breaking down the methane?
Sure. Yeah. So we can think of of methane as it works in a cycle. Okay. So there is the methane cycle, which is basically a cycle within the carbon cycle. And when you have healthy rangelands, in the soil, there are bacteria that consume methane. So therefore, there is no problem because it's cycling. If the soil is healthy and there's biodiversity in the soil, then there should be no methane problem. Again, it's when the animals might be on land that is degraded, and certainly when they are confined, and the land isn't managed well, and certainly the way that they are in industrial agriculture, that is when you get a problem.
Can I just come in there as well? And I think it's a really interesting question and one we get quite a lot. As others have said, I don't think it's ruminant livestock per se. I do agree that it's partly around management, but partly, unquestionably, it's about quantities of livestock that the planet is trying to support. So there's been a huge rise in the production of intensive livestock production systems. Many systems don't even, allow their livestock to go out to pasture, eat forage, natural kind of grasslands, often fed soya, corn, wheat, which could actually go into human consumption. There's no doubt methane is one of the most potent global greenhouse gases. So there is a question of quantity. We do have in the Western world to modify our diets to eat more plant-based diets. It's crazy when we're feeding food that goes to livestock that we could eat more efficiently and effectively. But at the same time, in the context of, yes, in the Western world particularly, that we need to eat less meat, to me it's about less and better meat. And the better element is really how you define that kind of regenerative approach. So certainly in parts of the UK, our most biodiverse areas are parts of our uplands, many of our wild grasslands that support huge range of biodiversity are dependent on ruminant livestock production. So it's the kind of production system and the quantities of ruminant meat that we eat is also part of this solution. But part of the answer towards regenerative agriculture is those more pastoral, extensive, forage-based food systems. And in certain parts of the world, I would argue, certainly in parts of Africa, communities need more access to meat, for example, and a regenerative approach, restoring those ecosystems in parts of Africa to support the protein deficit in parts of that world is part of the solution, I would argue, too.
And I'll jump in there at the, one more comment on the methane. We actually, at the Savory Institute, we actually do not believe that we should consume less meat. If you actually look at the number of ruminant animals, grazing animals that are currently living on the planet, it is actually less than it was 2,000 years ago, how many years ago you want to say. But now I will agree with Mark in that the number of domesticated livestock, feedlot, conventional ag, concentrated animals that are being managed in a way that are putting off methane, yes, are greatly larger now, and we do not agree with that system whatsoever. But we do believe that, like Mark was saying, if we use those lands that were put into monocropping of corn and soy and things like that that are feeding livestock, let's return those back to grasslands and use them in a way, or even in a better way of crop production, and use them in a way that is actually sequestering carbon, that's healthy, that's not contributing to the problem. But our studies have shown that soil-based decomposition of methane is at least equal to, if not greater than, the ruminant methane production. Obviously, that relies on healthy soil, healthy management, and what's being done on the land. But it's a great question because it's definitely a very big issue.
So just to clarify, you're saying not less meat, but less poorly managed, sort of intensive life.
Exactly. Another way of looking at it is it's not the ruminant, it's not the livestock, that's the criminal here, or the problem, it's the management. And so we do believe that there is enough space, there is enough land that can be utilized as healthy grasslands to produce enough protein product to meet our dietary needs while also positively benefiting climate.
Great. I still come back to this question, sort of diversity is a key, so diversity in diet as well as diversity in crop management and ecosystem management.
Okay, may I add to this as well? I guess one way to think about it is it's not as much, how many cattle or other sheep or other animals. It's a matter of where they are. And right now we have too many in feedlots and not enough on degraded landscapes that could be brought back from desertification with the reintroduction of properly managed ruminants. And another really important aspect of this question of plant-based plants versus meat proteins is that I think we really have to understand the extraordinary ecological and human health damage by industrial plant agriculture. And also, often we don't know, people may think that it's better for animals that you're protecting animals by not eating meat, which of course in a literal way is true, but how many animals die when large landscapes are cleared for industrial crop agriculture. So that we really need to grapple with the way that we grow crops as well when we're looking at environmental impact and maintaining biodiversity.
Very interesting. I'm just going to try and summarize some of the next few questions because we are coming to the close of our discussion and I'd love it to run on for another few hours really. So Mark, from our experience of working with larger companies, any examples where large-scale food agriculture has managed to move away from monocultures? Keeping to the monocultures discussion, any views on organic farming, the differences between practices? So Judith was just touching on this, but we could speak more to that. And monocultures, from Laura, monocultures also evolved with the rise of industrial farming, extensive use of machines. Farm areas have got bigger. Are there large-scale examples of regenerative agriculture that are not predicated on going back to very small-scale and labour-intensive farming? So I guess these questions are really all about which are the best ways forward and which great examples can we share. And perhaps if our speakers could each speak to those questions and also try to conclude with any opportunities that they're seeing for best practice and for collaboration going forward.
So shall I just very quickly kick off? So I think these are very good questions. What I'm really interested in is what are the kind of real, and we've heard some of these, what are the real principles that underpin regenerative agricultural practices that could apply across different types of practices in different geographies and different cultures. I think there is quite a debate, is regenerative agriculture just about organic farming? Actually, I think it's more than, obviously many of the principles that underpin organic farming, biodynamic farming, etc., are principles of regenerative agriculture, but I think there are more than that actually could apply across other agriculture practice, extensive, intensive, organic, inorganic. But I'll just leave that as a thought.
Okay, I can jump in, and what I'm seeing out there is increased innovation and a lot of integration. So you mentioned biodynamic, there's permaculture as a way in to understand design of agricultural systems and urban agricultural systems as well. There's silvopasture, which is bringing animals. There are animals that evolved in forests, and so having grazing animals in forests and savanna. And then agroforestry is also a really, really powerful opportunity. And I know that there are efforts to scale up agroforestry as well, because with agroforestry, you're getting the synergies of the tree plants and the crop plants, and how they can support each other, and how the trees in the system create shade. So anyway, I'll just give you one example that I'm learning a little bit about now, that there's some research going on in California of integrating sheep into vineyards, and they're getting great results. And of course, this is a practice that has been in viticulture historically, but with what we now understand about grazing practices and management, it can be really dynamic, and they're getting really great results in terms of the quality and quantity of the grapes and the regeneration of the land.
Very interesting example. Thanks, Judith. And Sarah, would you like to say some words?
Yeah, I've agreed with everything that has been said. I don't think we've even mentioned, I don't believe, pasture cropping yet, integrating cropping with pasture production. There's so many great people and organizations working in this space of solution, which is very, very exciting. I think for back to the principles that Mark was talking about, for us, it really comes down to the management. We believe that there's freedom within this framework of how we're managing. We believe that there is a lot that we can learn from nature, right? Nature does amazing things on its own. And so what can we learn from that and imitate or support in our practices when we are doing agricultural work and trying to regenerate all types of landscapes? For us, using a framework that allows us to look at the whole picture. There's Wendell Berry, a writer, an activist in the United States, he talks about how everything is connected by a web. And if you pull on one part of that web, the rest of the entire web will move. And we really believe that to be true. So how do we make decisions in agriculture and beyond that we are looking at the entire picture, so that when we mess or change or make a decision based on one thing, we are aware of how it is affecting the rest of the interconnected web of biological systems that exist within nature and within agriculture. So that principle of looking at the whole and managing and making decisions that actually give you the results that you want without unintended long-term consequences is at the core of the work that we try to focus on, and I think applicable across industries, across cultures, and across whatever type of agriculture people are committed to.
Thank you, Sarah, and I think that's a fantastic point for us to wrap up on, as we're all, as part of Forum's network, interested in systems changing and how we can achieve a better understanding of the systems that we're part of in order to support their long-term health. And so thanks for all the insights that you've shared, Judith, Sarah, and Mark, about opportunities here. And we've talked about some of the opportunities for business, this wonderful example of outcome-based tracking for businesses that want to demonstrate the impact that they're having on regenerative agriculture or through regenerative agriculture. We've talked about the potential benefits for urban areas as well as rural areas in terms of biodiversity, and touched on the many innovations that are emerging in this space or are developing from a significant history in this space, from permaculture to silvopasture. And it feels really like there are so many more conversations to be had and examples to share. And so just to reiterate that this is the beginning of a discussion, and that we'd very much encourage you to share examples with us through the Future Centre, at Future Centre. Any signals of change you have, just hashtag signal of change. And we will be in touch more to share about Forum's work. Mark, do you want to add a little more about what to expect from Forum?
No, we'll after the this webinar, we'll share with participants just a brief overview of what we're doing, and just to echo any case studies, any interested in participating in our work more fully, then don't hesitate to get in touch, but we'll drop you a line.
Great. Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating. Thanks for all the questions. And thank you very much, Judith and Sarah, for leading this fantastic discussion with us, and Mark for introducing it to us. And we'll hopefully see you on our next webinar. We'll be sharing details soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.